Welcome to the Feminist Park podcast. I'm Kwame.
And I'm Leilani. It's great to be kicking off this journey with you all today.
Yeah, we're diving into work that's really closely tied to the vision behind the Feminist Park project.
Imagining these truly equitable public spaces, starting with the idea for an intersectional feminist park right here in Berlin.
Exactly. And this podcast, well, it's kind of an extension of that. We're going to be digging into the academic research that, supports and informs that kind of vision.
We'll be taking these dense, sometimes quite academic papers and really pulling out the core and insights.
And looking at them through specific lenses, things like environmental justice, intersectionality, anti-colonial thought, queer theory.
All the stuff that helps us think critically about space. Imagine you are walking out your front door right now.
Okay.
Maybe you're heading down the street to the grocery store, or, maybe you're holding a child's hand, walking them to school.
Right, the typical morning routine.
Exactly. You have a specific destination in mind. And the moment your feet hit the sidewalk, you essentially have to make a choice.
A navigational choice.
Yeah. Do you take the absolute fastest route? Do you take the simplest route, the one that requires the fewest turns and the least amount of thinking?
Or do you take the route with the most trees, like the most shade, the most nature?
Exactly. And it is a calculation we all make every single day.
Often entirely subconsciously, too. I mean, we are constantly weighing the utility of time against the quality of our sensory experience.
But the thing is, most of the time, we don't even really make that calculation ourselves anymore. We just pull out our phones, plug the destination into a digital map, and let an algorithm dictate our path.
Right. And those algorithms are, well, they are universally and ruthlessly obsessed with speed.
Utterly obsessed. They view the city as this frictionless void, where the only metric of success is getting from point A to point B in the absolute minimum number of seconds.
Which is a huge problem.
It is. And so today, we are going on a mission to map out a totally hidden urban geometry. We're doing a deep dive into a massive, frankly fascinating stack of 3 recent academic papers, all focused on one specific place.
The city of Lodz in Poland.
Yes, Lodz, Poland.
Yeah.
Because the researchers here, they didn't just look at a map. They essentially tracked and analyzed the daily walking routes of over 48,000 primary school children.
Which, I mean, is just a staggering undertaking from a data science perspective.
Right, over 48,000 kids.
Yeah. And they aren't just looking at where these children live and the GPS coordinates of their schools. They built an entirely new methodology to analyze the exact, literal, visual experience of the physical spaces these children move through every single morning.
Which brings us to our overarching mission for this deep dive. We really want to understand the profound trade-offs between city density, our access to our daily needs, and our exposure to nature.
Because the deeper you get into this data, the more obvious it becomes that the way we currently build our cities forces us into compromises.
Especially vulnerable populations like children. We're forced into these incredibly difficult, unseen compromises just to get around.
And to really grasp the weight of what these researchers uncovered in Lodz, we have to ground ourselves in a concept that has completely taken over urban planning in recent years.
Oh, the 15-minute city.
Exactly, the 15-minute city. I mean, it has become the gold standard, right? The ultimate buzzword for mayors and city councils globally.
Yeah, you hear it everywhere now.
The basic premise is pretty straightforward.
Right.
Every resident of a city should be able to reach their essential daily needs, schools, grocery stores, pharmacies, healthcare facilities, and parks within a 15-minute walk or bike ride from their front door.
The goal being to reduce automobile dependency / carbon emissions and theoretically make neighborhoods more localized and, well, livable.
Which sounds like an absolute utopia.
Oh, totally. I think anyone listening would love the idea of never having to get in a car to buy a gallon of milk or, drop their kid off at soccer practice.
Right. But reading through these sources, it becomes incredibly clear that the 15-minute city framework has a massive glaring blind spot.
A huge one.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the framework focuses almost entirely on proximity, right?
Exactly. It measures the time and the physical distance it takes to traverse the space, but it rarely, if ever, accounts for the actual quality of that walk.
And that blind spot, it becomes an absolute canyon when we talk about children, because a child's psychological and developmental experience of a walk is fundamentally different from, say, an adult who is just power walking to a train station with noise-canceling headphones on.
Yeah, the adult is just commuting. The current planning paradigm relies heavily on what planners call buffer-based metrics.
Buffer-based metrics.
Right. So if a city wants to know if you live in a good neighborhood, they pull up a digital map, draw a circle around your house representing a 15-minute walking radius, and then they essentially just run a query to count the amenities inside that circle.
So it's just a math equation.
Basically, if the circle captures 3 parks, a grocery store, and a school, the algorithm spits out a high score. You are deemed to have excellent access to urban resources.
Which, sure, makes sense on a spreadsheet. But it assumes we experience cities like birds flying over them.
Exactly. It's Euclidean geometry, measuring as the crow flies.
But humans actually experience cities at ground level, completely constrained by street networks. Like if my 15-minute circle has 3 parks in it, but I have to cross a heavily trafficked 8-lane highway to get to them.
Your actual human experience of that access is terrible.
Right, it's effectively zero.
Furthermore, it completely ignores the visual reality of the transit itself, which is why the authors of these papers propose a vital shift in how we measure urban livability.
This is where we get into the VEG, right?
Yes. They argue that we need to abandon simple proximity and start measuring visual exposure to greenery, or VEG.
VEG, I love that acronym.
It works perfectly. VEG doesn't care about the total acreage of a park hidden behind a wall 3 blocks away. It measures what a pedestrian actually sees at eye level, minute by minute, while they are physically moving through the space.
It's basically the difference between knowing a world-class art museum is located in your zip code versus actually walking through the gallery and looking at the paintings.
That's a great way to put it. The mere presence of nature in your vicinity does absolutely nothing for your nervous system if you can't actually see it.
And what's fascinating here is that the visual experience is the primary mechanism through which we interact with nature in a highly dense urban environment.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. A child might live a mathematically perfect 5-minute walk from a beautiful, expansive public park.
Right.
So the standard 15-minute city algorithm gives that child's address a gold star for high accessibility to green space.
But if their actual physical walking route to that park involves navigating a narrow concrete street canyon.
Right, walking past high windowless brick walls that completely block any view of private gardens and dodging parked cars the entire way.
Their actual visual exposure to greenery on that walk is absolute zero.
Zero. The map says they are bathed in green, but their retinas are only registering gray concrete and asphalt.
And the researchers didn't just measure green as this big monolithic concept. They broke this visual exposure down into 2 distinct, highly specific categories, right?
Yes, close-up views and distant views.
Okay, let's break those down.
Well, this is where the psychology of environmental design really comes in. Close-up views are defined as vegetation within 10 meters of the pedestrian.
10 meters, so pretty close.
For a child, this 10-meter zone is everything. It is the tactile zone. This is the greenery they can actually reach out and touch. The leaves, they can pull off a low-hanging branch, the shrubs where they might spot a caterpillar.
It is immediate. It's physical.
Exactly. It sparks spontaneous interaction and microplay.
It's the texture of the city. I remember walking to school and dragging a stick along the hedges. You can't do that with a tree that is 50 meters away behind a wrought iron fence.
No, you can't. And that brings us to the distant views, which the researchers categorize as vegetation within a 50-meter radius.
Okay, so a wider shot.
Right. While a child can't touch a tree 50 meters away, this distant greenery provides the broader spatial arrangement of the environment.
It provides the overarching canopy.
Yes, the sense of enclosure, the general atmospheric feeling of moving through a living environment rather than an industrial corridor.
And both ranges matter immensely, but they serve different neurological purposes, don't they?
They do. Decades of clinical studies show that glimpses of green, even just distant tree canopies, restore attention, reduce mental fatigue, and lower cortisol levels.
Wow.
It literally makes a pedestrian want to continue walking.
So if we accept that premise, it really forces a harsh critique of the 15-minute city as it's currently pitched.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if urban planners are only designing our neighborhoods for speed and proximity, without factoring in the sensory data of what we actually see along the way, we are essentially just building highly efficient concrete treadmill.
Concrete treadmills, that is exactly what they are.
We are optimizing for utility while actively ignoring human well-being. And for a 7-year-old, a walk to school isn't a commute.
No, it's not.
It's a formative daily event that shapes their connection to the natural world and influences their cognitive development.
And this ties into a much deeper issue of designing for caregiving versus commuting. Historically, urban grids were optimized for the commuter, typically a male head of household traveling from home to a central
Right,
office.
point A to point B.
But caregiving walks, taking a child to school, stopping at the grocer, moving with strollers, that involves a completely different set of needs. Needs that these algorithms largely ignore. The danger the authors warn against is treating human beings as mere logistical units that need to be transported between nodes as quickly as possible.
It's treating people like cargo. But to prove that this visual deprivation is happening, the researchers had to actually measure it.
And that is the hard part.
I really want to spend some real time on the methodology here, because the mechanics of how they achieve this are just staggering. Measuring what 48,000 individual children are seeing on their daily walks in a major industrial city sounds like an impossible computational problem.
It does. And they didn't just send out a survey asking kids if they saw trees.
Right, that would be too subjective.
They utilized high-resolution LiDAR data combined with 3D digital surface models.
Okay, LiDAR, that's lasers, right?
Exactly. It stands for light detection and ranging. It basically involves flying over the city and pulsing laser light down to the surface, measuring the time it takes for the light to bounce back.
Which creates a map.
More than a map. It creates an incredibly dense 3D point cloud of the entire physical environment.
So they aren't just looking at a flat 2D satellite image on Google Maps where a tree is just a green circle.
No. They essentially built a one-to-one scale digital twin of the city of logs.
A fully three-dimensional replica.
Yes. These models map the exact height, volume, and spread of the tree canopy down to a half-meter resolution. It mapped the height of every single building, every retaining wall, every solid fence, every physical barrier that could block a line of sight.
That's wild. They know exactly where a 2-meter brick wall obscures a 3-meter shrub.
Down to the centimeter.
Well, and then they had to put digital eyeballs inside this 3D model.
Right. They ran massive computations called viewed analyses.
Viewed analyses.
Yeah. Imagine putting a virtual GoPro camera on the head of a digital avatar, walking them through this simulated 3D city, and having a supercomputer calculate millions of simulated rays of light shooting out from the camera lens at every single second.
It sounds like a video game engine.
It's very similar. The algorithm calculates exactly how many of those rays hit a pixel categorized as vegetation versus a pixel categorized as concrete.
And what blows my mind is the precision regarding the human element. They didn't just use a standard adult height for the camera.
No, they factored in the exact eye level of children. And they went even further by factoring in age-specific walking speeds.
The data granularity is just phenomenal.
It is. They divided the 48,000 children into two cohorts based on the Polish primary school system. So you have ages 7 to 10 and ages 11 to 15.
Okay.
Then, relying on standardized clinical 6-minute walk tests, which are medical benchmarks for human locomotion, they calculated that the younger cohort walks at an average speed of 3.7 kilometers per hour.
And the older kids?
The older cohort walks at 4.0 kilometers per hour.
Which fundamentally changes the geometry of the 15-minute city.
Absolutely.
Because a 15-minute walk for a 7-year-old moving at 3.7 kilometers an hour covers a drastically smaller physical radius than a 15-minute walk for a healthy adult moving at 5 kilometers an hour.
Exactly. A neighborhood that is a 15-minute city for a 30-year-old might be a 25-minute city for a first grader.
So by locking in those exact physical constraints, the researchers mapped out 8 types of critical urban amenities: schools, playgrounds, cultural centers, grocery stores, eateries, sports fields, healthcare centers, and public green spaces.
Right. And then they asked the supercomputer to calculate the route from every single child's front door to these specific amenities.
And calculate the exact percentage of greenery in their field division for every meter of the journey.
Yes. Which sets up the central conflict of the entire study.
Right, because if we recognize that seeing greenery is just as important as reaching the destination, especially for a child's cognitive load before a school day, what happens when we tell the computer to actively route these kids through greener paths?
Do we inherently break the 15-minute rule?
Exactly.
No.
Do we force them to walk too far?
So to test that trade-off, the researchers modeled 3 distinct hypothetical routes for every single child's morning commute to school.
Okay. Let's look at the 3 routes.
First, they plotted the absolute shortest route. This minimizes physical distance using Dijkstra's algorithm.
Dijkstra's algorithm. That is the foundational math behind almost every GPS and map app we use, right?
It is. It views the city street network as a series of nodes and edges, and it just aggressively calculates the lowest possible numerical weight meeting distance between the start node and the end node.
It has no concept of beauty or safety. It only knows math.
Exactly. It's the shortest physical distance, regardless of the environment.
Okay, so that's route one.
The second route they mapped was the simplest route. This algorithm minimizes the number of turns and intersections.
So the goal here is to reduce the cognitive load of navigation.
Right. A route might be slightly longer in distance, but if it's just one straight line down a single boulevard, it's vastly easier for a child to process than a route that requires zigzagging through 6 different side streets and crossing multiple busy intersections.
That makes total sense, especially for younger kids.
Yeah.
And then the third route is the greenest route.
Yes. The algorithm is instructed to maximize the visual exposure to greenery, regardless of how many turns it requires or how much distance it adds.
And looking at the results, the shortest route is almost never the greenest route, is it?
Rarely. The data reveals a very tangible, quantifiable physical cost to seeking out nature in an urban environment.
A physical cost.
Yes. To walk the absolute greenest possible route to their school, the children in Lodz have to walk, on average, 9.5% further than if they took the shortest path.
Okay. And what is that in actual distance?
In absolute physical terms, that equates to an extra 46 meters per trip.
46 meters. I mean, in the grand scheme of a morning commute, that really doesn't sound like an insurmountable hurdle. We are talking about half a football field.
The distance seems trivial, yes, and the reward for that slight detour is massive.
What's the reward?
The data shows that by making that trade-off, by walking just an extra 9.5%, half of the children in the city could increase their visual exposure to greenery by at least 18%.
Wow. An 18% increase just for an extra 46 meters.
Exactly. That is a phenomenal upgrade in the sensory quality of their daily environment for the cost of a few dozen extra footsteps.
I think almost any parent would gladly take that deal. An extra minute of walking for an 18% boost in nature exposure feels like a no-brainer.
It really does.
But thinking about this practically, it really highlights the dual nature of why we walk in the first place.
Yeah.
Like when I am rushing to the subway station because I overslept and I have a meeting, that is purely a utility walk.
Right. You want Dijkstra's algorithm.
I want the frictionless straight line.
Yeah.
And I truly do not care if that line takes me through a brutalist concrete alleyway next to a dumpster. I just need to arrive.
But when you're walking your dog on a Saturday morning?
That is a recreational walk. I will actively go out of my way to walk down a tree-lined street just to look at the leaves.
And a child's daily walk to school occupies a very strange hybrid space between those two extremes.
Oh, that's a good point.
It is undeniably a utility walk. There is a bell that rings at a specific time, and they face consequences if they are late. But it is also a recreational walk. It is their primary independent time to socialize with peers, to observe their neighborhood, and to decompress before sitting at a desk for 6 hours.
So they need both.
They do. But the research clearly demonstrates that to maximize that restorative, recreational aspect, the greenery, you have to sacrifice the utility.
You must give up speed.
Yes. And importantly, you often have to accept increased complexity. Greener routes tend to require more turns, more winding paths, and a higher cognitive load to navigate.
But there has to be a physical breaking point, right? I mean, if the greenest route to school involves the 3-mile detour, no 7-year-old is going to take it, no matter how beautiful the canopy is.
Exactly. The utility eventually has to win out over the recreation.
So do they find a limit?
They actually identified that exact threshold in the data. This raises an important question about limits. They found a hard ceiling. Beyond 800 extra meters of walking, the environmental returns diminish to absolute zero.
Wow. 800 meters.
Yeah. If a child walks more than an extra 800 meters out of their way, which is roughly half a mile, they stop gaining any additional visual exposure to greenery.
They have mathematically maxed out the green potential of their surrounding urban grid.
Precisely.
Half a mile of extra walking just to find some shade. For a young kid carrying a heavy backpack, maybe in the rain or the cold, an extra half mile is a massive deterrent.
It's often a deal breaker.
And the sources note something really crucial about the psychology of this choice. They found that a route needs to have a minimum of about 24% visual exposure to greenery to actively, positively influence a child's willingness to walk in the first place.
Yes, the 24% threshold.
If a walking route falls below that 24% threshold, the environment is so visually barren that children, And let's be real, their parents making the logistical decisions are highly likely to abandon active transit altogether and just say, forget it, it's too ugly and stressful, we are driving to school.
Which completely defeats the purpose of the 15-minute city carbon reduction goal.
Exactly.
If the walk is technically possible but miserable, people will drive.
So what happens to the kids who don't even have the geographic option to hit that 24% threshold? If an extra 800 meters gets you 0 extra green, it makes me wonder about the physical shape of these neighborhoods. Are there kids trapped in a grid that literally prevents nature from existing?
That leads to one of the most sobering statistical discoveries in the entire study. The researchers identified a specific cohort of children amounting to 10% of the entire study population in Ludes,
Oh, yeah?
who exists in what is essentially a geographic anomaly. For this 10% of children, their absolute shortest, most utilitarian route to school and their greenest possible route to school are the exact same path.
Wait, meaning the algorithm cannot find a single alternative street to route them down that has more trees?
There is no greener alternative that doesn't completely break the algorithm by becoming absurdly and practically long, well past that 800-meter threshold we discussed.
Oh my God.
The street network they live on provides only one viable vector to their destination.
A listener might hear that and think, well, maybe they're just incredibly lucky. Maybe their single shortest route is already a lush, beautiful tree-lined boulevard, so they don't need an alternative.
I wish that were the case. But the data proves otherwise. For this trapped 10% of children, their total visual exposure to greenery on this single available path is only 48%.
48%, which is drastically below the citywide averages for the optimized green routes, which sit comfortably around 60% or higher.
Right. For these thousands of children, choosing nature over speed isn't a calculation they can make. The choice has been removed from them by the built environment.
The greenery simply does not exist within the physical constraints of their slice of the city.
It's just not there.
And when you look at that 10% entrapment, it forces a realization. This mathematical trade-off, sacrificing speed for trees, is not applied equally across the map.
Not at all.
The physical skeleton of the city itself, the way the concrete was poured decades or centuries ago, actively dictates who gets to walk in the shade and who is forced onto the concrete treadmill.
And to accurately analyze how the city's skeleton dictates this, the researchers knew they couldn't just look at LODs as one giant homogeneous blob of data.
Right, because cities are complex patchworks of different historical eras and planning philosophies.
Exactly. So they divided LODs into 13 distinct urban zones.
Okay, 13 zones.
This zoning allowed them to compare comparable units. You cannot mathematically compare the walking experience in a densely packed 19th century medieval core to the walking experience in a modern, sprawling, suburban cul-de-sac.
The baseline geometry is entirely different.
Totally different.
So when they isolated these 13 zones, the data revealed a brutal urban-peri-urban trade-off. Let's start with the historical city center.
Okay.
Lodz has a massive industrial history, right? It exploded in the 19th century as a textile manufacturing hub. So the historical core is incredibly dense.
Very dense.
And from a pure accessibility standpoint, this area is a 15-minute city dream. The data shows that almost all the children living in the center can reach their schools, grocery stores, and playgrounds well within a 15-minute walk.
It is the ultimate utility environment. Everything is close.
But the visual exposure to greenery is abysmal.
Absolutely abysmal.
Huh?
On their daily routes to school, children in the historical center experience, on average, only 7.1% close-up greenery.
7.1%. That means 93% of their tactile immediate field of vision is just man-made artificial surfaces.
It is essentially a concrete labyrinth.
Right.
Now, if we flip to the opposite extreme and look at the peripheral detached housing zones, what an American audience would instantly recognize as traditional suburbs, the visual experience is fantastic.
Yeah.
Children navigating these outer zones have walking routes with up to 71% vegetation cover. They are surrounded by lawns, mature trees, and open sky.
And their accessibility is terrible.
Yeah.
Because the geometry of the suburb worked against proximity. The study notes that between 21% and 25% of children in these peripheral zones physically cannot reach a school or a sports field within a 15-minute walk.
The distances are just too vast.
This creates a bleak binary for families. If you want your child to have a highly efficient, short walk to school, you have to move to the core and accept that their developing brain will interact with almost zero nature on a daily basis.
Right.
But if you want them to see trees and breathe cleaner air, you move to the periphery, but you have to accept that they lose their independence because they cannot walk to school at all. They must be driven.
It's a terrible choice to have to make.
I think we need to explain why the historical core is so visually barren.
Yeah.
It isn't just because the City Parks Department forgot to plant trees.
No, it comes down to urban morphology, the physical shape and placement of the buildings on the plots of land.
Right.
In a 19th century industrial core, the land was divided to maximize density. You have continuous building frontages, meaning the buildings are attached side by side with absolutely no gaps or alleys between them.
They are built flush against the sidewalk.
Exactly. This creates narrow, deep street canyons. The crucial factor here is that these historical buildings often do have green spaces, but they are located in interior courtyards hidden behind the buildings themselves.
Right. A drone flying overhead would look down and say, wow, look at all these green courtyards in the center of the blocks. This city is 30% green canopy.
But a 7-year-old on the sidewalk can't see through a brick wall.
The 3D View analysis catches this discrepancy perfectly. To the pedestrian, those hidden courtyards effectively do not exist.
This is why I find this data set so compelling. It perfectly captures how historical architecture traps modern populations.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because within this data, the researchers found a massive structural anomaly in LODs that completely shatters this harsh density versus nature trade-off.
They did.
And this is the part of the deep dive that completely upended my assumptions. The structural exception to the rule is the post-socialist multifamily housing estates.
Yes.
When I hear post-socialist housing blocks, my brain, heavily influenced by Western media tropes, immediately conjures images of bleak, dystopian, gray, brutalist concrete towers surrounded by cracked asphalt.
That's the stereotype.
But the empirical data proves the exact opposite.
It is a profound misconception. The data shows that these specific urban zones offer what the researchers explicitly define as a win-win scenario.
A win-win.
Yes. Children living in these sprawling post-socialist estates have incredibly high walking access to multiple amenities. They meet the 15-minute city criteria just as easily as the kids in the dense historical core.
And simultaneously, their homeschool routes feature 44.9% close-up green.
Even 45%.
They are getting 45% tactile, immersive nature exposure while still hitting all their utility markers in 15 minutes. How did a seemingly utilitarian socialist housing project achieve a balance that modern multi-million-dollar urban redevelopments struggle to hit? Was it just a geographical accident?
No, it was entirely intentional. It was born out of a very specific ideological approach to urban planning.
Okay, tell me about that.
If we look at the history of socialist urban planning in Central and Eastern Europe after World War II, the ideology heavily borrowed from modernist planners like Le Corbusier and the principles of the Athens Charter.
Right.
Yes, the architecture emphasized large-scale, prefabricated concrete housing blocks. They needed to house millions of people quickly and cheaply. But the critical difference is what they did with the space between the blocks.
The towers in the park concept.
Exactly. Socialist planning treated equitable access to green space as a fundamental public good, vital for public health and worker efficiency. Because the state owned the land, they weren't trying to maximize the profit of every single square meter. So the buildings went up vertically, specifically so the ground plane could remain wide open. These estates were designed with vast, integrated green spaces and entirely separate, dedicated pedestrian networks.
The sidewalks weren't just an afterthought shoved next to a road. They were the primary circulatory system of the neighborhood.
Right. Contrast that with the liberal, profit-driven urban planning that often dictated infill development in subsequent decades.
In a purely capitalist planning model, the goal is often densification, squeezing as much leasable square footage into a private plot as possible.
Which usually means building the structure right up to the lot line, right against the sidewalk, and paving over whatever is left for parking.
But in the post-socialist estates, the pedestrian is prioritized in the landscape. A child stepping out of their apartment block doesn't immediately step onto a sidewalk choked with car exhaust.
No, they step onto a pedestrian pathway that weaves through a park-like setting to reach the school, which was intentionally built in the center of the estate.
It paints such a vivid contrast of the daily human experience. Like, imagine the 8.0 a.m. commute. The child in the historical core steps out of their door and walks for 5 minutes. They are pinned between a continuous brick wall on their left and a wall of parked cars on their right.
They are inhaling exhaust, dodging traffic at every narrow intersection, and their brain is on high alert processing threat vectors.
Meanwhile, A child in the post-socialist blocks steps out and walks 5 minutes on a dedicated pedestrian path that meanders between buildings, entirely under a canopy of mature linden and oak trees. They potentially never interact with a single automobile until they reach the school doors.
They are both technically executing a 5-minute walk to school, which satisfies the basic 15-minute city algorithm.
But the psychological and physiological impacts on those two children's nervous systems are worlds apart. One arrives at school stressed and visually fatigued. The other arrives restored.
However, geometry and architectural history aren't the only forces dictating these routes. This is where the deep dive takes a much heavier, more critical turn. The researchers didn't stop at mapping buildings, trees, and walking speeds. They took this massive data set of 48,000 routes and layered socioeconomic status, or SES, over the map.
And when you introduce class and income into the algorithm, a much darker picture of environmental justice emerges.
It does. This is where the methodology truly exposes the invisible machinery of the city. We know that lower-income neighborhoods historically have fewer parks. That's a known quantity in urban planning.
Right.
But the researchers assessed the routes based on the SES of the children's specific neighborhoods, and what they found goes much deeper than just park placement.
Tell me.
They found that across all three route types, whether the child takes the shortest Dijkstra route, the simplest low cognitive load route, or the absolute greenest possible route exposure to greenery, is consistently, statistically significantly lower for low SES children compared to high SES children.
So the game is rigged at the infrastructural level.
Completely. The data shows that a child's socioeconomic background heavily predetermines their visual access to nature, regardless of the choices they make on their morning walk. Let's look at the hard numbers because they perfectly illustrate the disparity.
Put me with the numbers.
The median visual exposure to greenery on the absolute greenest possible route for a low SES child in Lodz is 46.5%.
So 46.5% is the ceiling. That is the absolute best-case scenario if that lower-income child goes out of their way to find nature.
Yes. Now look at the high SES child. The median visual exposure on their absolute shortest, most utilitarian, least green route is 51.45%.
I really want to make sure the listener absorbs that. Even if a kid from a lower-income neighborhood actively chooses to put in more effort if they walk further, navigate a more complex route, and go out of their way just to see a tree, their absolute maximum possible experience of nature is still worse than a wealthy kid who's just taking the fastest, most direct, lazy path to school.
Exactly. The wealthy child's baseline is higher than the lower-income child's maximum potential.
It is the definition of structural environmental injustice, mathematically quantified. And this finding fundamentally changes how we measure equity in modern cities.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, traditionally, environmental justice is measured by residency. A city planner will point to a map and say, look, we secured funding and put a new public park in this low-income zip code. We solved the access problem.
Right.
But this study proves that injustice persists in the spaces we move through, not just the places we live.
So what does this all mean? Because life isn't just lived at a static home address or a static school address.
Right.
It is lived in the transit between them. This data reminds me of playing a video game where the difficulty setting is permanently locked on hard mode, based purely on your starting spawn location.
That's a great analogy.
You can put in more effort, you can try to hack the map, you can walk further, but the physical architecture of the game engine will not let you achieve the same score as someone who spawned in the wealthy neighborhood on easy mode.
That analogy holds up perfectly because, just like a video game engine, this physical disparity was programmed over time. It isn't accidental. It stems from deep systemic issues in how we value land and build cities.
Right.
Historically and continually, lower-cost housing is placed near transport and industrial infrastructure highways, freight railways, manufacturing corridors, logistics hubs. It is actively zoned away from green infrastructure.
Because land near parks is more expensive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Furthermore, land near parks is inherently more expensive, which leads to eco-gentrification. As soon as a neighborhood gets greener, property values rise, effectively pushing low SES families out to more industrial, less green zones.
I do want to push back slightly on one element here, or at least explore a complication the researchers brought up regarding the type of greenery in these lower SES areas.
Okay, sure.
The sources highlight that in these specific neighborhoods, a lot of the visual greenery that children are seeing isn't coming from formal manicured city parks, it's coming from informal greenery.
Yes, informal greenery makes up a massive percentage of the visual diet in these zones. We're talking about shrubs growing wild along a chain link fence, an unmanaged vacant dirt lot taken over by weeds, vegetation sprouting in an abandoned industrial brownfield, or just overgrown, unmaintained street verges.
I get that to a 7-year-old. A butterfly on a weed is still nature. The kid doesn't care if the bush is in a multi-million-dollar botanical garden or an abandoned lot.
Exact.
But let's be real, parents, caregivers doing these walks, they might view an overgrown, unlit, vacant lot as a severe safety hazard, a place where trash accumulates, not a lovely nature walk. Isn't there a severe limitation to championing informal green spaces as a win for these kids?
That is the exact tension urban planners face. From an ecological and a purely visual standpoint, that overgrown vacant lot provides immediate sensory relief to a pedestrian navigating a concrete corridor.
Right, it lowers the temperature.
It lowers the temperature, it absorbs storm water, and it breaks up the visual monotony of gray walls. But socially, as you point out, it signals neglect.
And because it signals neglect, it is incredibly vulnerable. To a city planner or private real estate developer, an unmanaged vacant lot covered in weeds isn't a vital piece of a child's visual ecosystem.
Yeah.
It is just empty, underutilized real estate waiting to be paved over for infill development or a new warehouse.
And when informal greenery is bulldozed to build a new concrete structure, the visual exposure for the pedestrians on that street drops dramatically.
It just vanishes.
And the cruel irony is that when cities do secure funding for greening projects, they tend to focus entirely on grand, formal parks, large set-piece projects that look great in a mayoral campaign brochure.
Right, ribbon-cutting ceremonies.
Exactly. They completely ignore the street-level shrubs, the informal patches, and the overgrown fence lines that actually make up the bulk of a child's visual experience on their daily utility walks.
So given all this data, the 3D models, the view sheds, the 800-meter limits, the SES disparities, what should urban planners actually be doing? If just planting a big park isn't the solution, how do we fix the concrete treadmills?
Well, the authors argue forcefully for route-specific, mobility-based greening. Planners need to stop looking at static maps and start identifying the exact transit corridors where vulnerable populations, particularly children and the elderly, are actually walking.
That makes sense.
If the data shows that a specific, highly degraded street canyon is the only viable route connecting a dense, low SES housing estate to the local primary school, that specific street needs hyper-targeted interventions.
But what does a targeted intervention look like if you can't knock down the buildings?
It means getting creative with the street geometry. It could mean installing green walls or vertical gardens on the sides of the windowless brick building.
Oh, I've seen those. They look amazing.
They do. It could also mean ripping up a lane of on-street parking to install a vegetated bioswale. It means planting aggressive, fast-growing street trees.
Okay.
And crucially, it means implementing policies to protect the existing informal green spaces along these routes, recognizing their immense value to the pedestrian visual field, rather than letting them be uniformly bulldozed for development.
Because keeping the mature, messy bushes we already have is often just as important as planting new, neat ones.
Often more important, a mature piece of informal vegetation provides immediate visual, psychological, and ecological benefits today. If you bulldoze it and plant a small, formal sapling, it will take a decade for that sapling to provide the same level of canopy coverage and visual relief.
This has been such a paradigm-shifting deep dive into how we perceive our own habitats. We started by looking at the 15-minute city, a concept that sounds flawless on paper, but we quickly realized it desperately needs a sensory visual upgrade.
It really does.
Proximity simply isn't enough. The psychological quality of the journey matters immensely. We look at how, surprisingly, the intentional public health focus of post-socialist architecture accidentally provided a brilliant blueprint for balancing high density with immersive nature.
The win-win scenario.
Right. And we confronted the heavy reality that the simple act of a child walking to school reveals incredibly deep, structurally engineered socioeconomic divides, where wealth actively dictates whether your daily walk is a restorative stroll through a canopy or a stressful march through a concrete tunnel.
It really forces you to evaluate the physical spaces you move through with a much more critical eye. I would ask anyone listening to think about their own daily commute tomorrow morning, or their walk to the local coffee shop.
Yeah, look around.
Look at the structures around you. Are your buildings pushed right up against the sidewalk like the historical core of logs, or are they set back behind vegetation? How much of your chosen route is dictated strictly by the algorithm's demand for speed versus your own biological need for a sensory experience?
Are you instinctively taking the shortest path, or are you taking the greenest?
And what is that unseen calculation doing to your mental state before you even sit down to start your day?
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you navigate your city this week. We rely completely on digital maps to manage our lives. We outsource our spatial awareness to these apps, and those algorithms are universally rigidly programmed to prioritize time and efficiency. They are machines built to maximize utility.
Pure utility.
But what if our technology allowed us to route for well-being instead of just speed? What if tomorrow your map app updated and it features a child-friendly button or a maximum tree canopy button? Would you choose to click it and take that extra 46-meter detour? And perhaps more importantly, if you push that button while standing in your own neighborhood, would a green route even exist? This knowledge is a tool, really. A tool for seeing your city differently and potentially for helping to change it.
It's been a really insightful deep dive, I think. This document provides such a vital framework, especially for projects like the Feminist Park Project that are trying to build something fundamentally different. It shows just how interlinked urban design and social justice are.
It really does. But it also shows the scale of the challenge, right? It requires sustained effort, real commitment, and a genuine willingness to shift power dynamics in how cities get made and managed.
Definitely. It makes you think about how we ensure those voices, the ones that have been excluded, are actually heard and centered.
There's another quote from Sarah Ahmed that feels relevant here.
Go on.
She says, "If you have to shout to be heard, you are heard as shouting."
That's powerful.
It makes you ponder, doesn't it? How can the design of public space itself work differently? How can it amplify the voices of those who've been historically silenced, ensuring their needs are met without them having to shout just to be noticed?
How can design itself listen? That's a really provocative thought to end on.
A lot to think about.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.